She wiped my satellite firmware and called it legacy junk. I rebuilt it for her father's biggest competitor in 9 days. I was standing in a hallway I'd walked every morning for 16 years. Chantilly, Virginia. Halcyon Aerospace. The classified server room was 10 feet ahead of me, behind a cipher lock I could open in my sleep. Except I couldn't. Not anymore. The lock code had been changed overnight. A laminated sign was taped to the door at eye level. The kind of sign someone prints in a hurry. The lamination still warm at the edges. Repository migration in progress. VP innovation access only. The fluorescent lights buzzed. They always buzzed. 16 years in this hallway, and the facilities team never fixed it. The air smelled like recycled nothing. No weather, no seasons, no outside. Just the institutional hum of a building designed to keep secrets. My hand was still on the door handle when Keith Holloway came around the corner. Keith was 31, a junior systems engineer, my mentee for 5 years. Smart kid. Good instincts. Right now his face was the color of copier paper. He said 3 words. She deleted it. I looked at him. She deleted it? He nodded. His badge lanyard was twisted. He'd been running. All of it? All 3 baselines. The entire repository. She purged it last night to make room for the drone development environment. I stood there for 4 seconds. Maybe 5. Understood. Keith was waiting for me to explode, to punch the wall, to storm down the hall toward Vanessa Kern's office and kick the door in. That's what he expected. That's what anyone would expect when you tell a man that 16 years of his life's work. The architecture he wrote by hand, line by line, in a room where you couldn't bring a phone or a watch or a pen that wasn't government issued, has been erased by someone who thought it was junk. I didn't do any of that. I was doing math. My name is Stuart Ames. I'm 50 years old. And until that Tuesday morning in late November, I'd spent every working day of my adult life either serving the United States Navy or building the systems that kept its eyes in the sky. I commissioned as an ensign at 22, straight out of Virginia Tech with an electrical engineering degree. 12 years as an avionics systems officer, most of it with Naval Air Systems Command at Patuxent River. I deployed twice, once aboard the Eisenhower, once at a test facility in the Pacific I still can't name. I exited at 34 as a lieutenant commander. 04. I'd spent my entire career inside classified programs, working on systems that existed in secure rooms and nowhere else. Halcyon Aerospace hired me the week I separated. 16 years ago. I walked into this building in Chantilly when I was 34 and I hadn't left. My specialty was guidance firmware for reconnaissance satellites operating under classified NRO contracts. The National Reconnaissance Office. The agency that runs this country's eyes in orbit. Halcyon's contract portfolio with the NRO was worth $1.8 billion across 3 active satellite programs. Every one of those programs ran on firmware I designed. I handwrote the original architecture on graph paper in 2008. Sat in a SKF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, at a desk with no window, no phone, no personal effects, and I wrote it in mechanical pencil. Pentel P205, black, 0.5 millimeter lead, $4.99 at Office Depot. I've bought the same pencil for 16 years. There's one in my shirt pocket right now. That firmware guided satellites from 22,000 miles up. Every iteration I built after the original. 3 generations across 3 programs. Lived in 2 places. The classified repository and my head. Classification rules prohibited external documentation. No design documents outside the secure network. No code comments accessible to uncleared personnel. No training manuals. Nothing. I was the documentation. There were 3 people in the United States with both the TS/SCI security clearance and the technical expertise to build and maintain that firmware. I was one of them. The other two were a 63-year-old at Northrop, who'd retired in 2021, and a woman at JPL who worked a different orbital band. For Halcyon-specific programs, for the NRO's specific requirements, I wasn't one of three. I was the only one. And here's what 16 years of being the only one cost me. I missed Nolan's first pin. My son, 17 now, wrestles at 170 for Briarwoods. He was 14 when he pinned a kid from Tuscarora in the second period of a dual meet, his first varsity pin. Meg recorded it on her phone. My wife. 22 years married, 48 years old, the most patient woman in Northern Virginia. She's an archivist at the Loudoun County Public Library. Garage at 9:15, still wearing my badge. Garage at 9:15, still wearing my badge lanyard. The fluorescent lights turning everything green. Nolan's face when the ref raised his hand, that expression, that pure shock of winning. I watched it on a 4-inch screen in a concrete box. I wasn't there. I was verifying firmware for a satellite launching in 19 days. There was the Thanksgiving I worked through. A December launch window meant a 72-hour firmware verification cycle that fell over the holiday. Meg brought me a plate at the office. Turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce in a Tupperware container, all wrapped in foil. Security had to inspect it at the front desk. I ate it cold at my workstation at 7 p.m., while the rest of Halcyon was dark and empty. The cranberry sauce had that ridged shape from the can. Meg made everything else from scratch, but the cranberry sauce was always ocean spray from the can, because that's how her mother did it. I ate it with a plastic fork from the break room and went back to work. The company Christmas party. I attended one. In 2011, 3 years in. Stood in the corner with a ginger ale. Talked to no one. Left after 40 minutes. Not because I didn't want to be social. Because I'd just spent 11 hours in a room where I couldn't tell anyone what I did. And the idea of making small talk about football felt like speaking a foreign language. I never went back. No one noticed. Nolan's travel wrestling tournaments. Saturday mornings. Gyms that smelled like disinfectant and sweat. Brackets taped to cinder block walls. I made maybe a third of them. Meg drove. Meg kept the schedule. Meg sat in the bleachers and filmed the matches and sent me the results. Nolan never complained. He's got his father's temperament. Quiet, mechanical, processes things internally. He rebuilds small engines in the garage on weekends. Wants to study aerospace engineering. He understood, in the way a kid understands a parent's absence without fully accepting it, that his father's work was important and invisible and consuming. My sacrifice was classified. Every hour I gave, every event I missed, every holiday I worked, none of it could be explained, referenced, or justified outside a secure facility. I couldn't tell my wife why I was late. I couldn't tell my son why I missed the meet. I couldn't tell anyone at the Christmas party what kept me in that building until the lights in the parking lot were the only ones still on. I gave Halcyon Aerospace 16 years of silence. And then Vanessa Kearns deleted what I built in that silence and called it legacy junk. Vanessa Kearns, 26 years old, Stanford MBA, class of 2022, daughter of Leland Kearns, founder and chairman of Halcyon Aerospace. Her aerospace experience before joining the company consisted of 14 months of innovation consulting performed from her father's guest house in McLean. I don't know what that consulting produced. No one does. But it was enough, apparently, to earn the title of Vice President of Innovation 6 months ago. She arrived with a pitch deck, a cardinal red Stanford blazer she wore to every meeting like a team jersey, and a set of manicured nails that had never touched a cipher lock. She wore her Apple Watch into the CF. I filed a written security violation report 3 times, 3 separate incidents, each one acknowledged by security, forwarded to program management, and ignored. Her vision for Halcyon was commercial drones. Commercial adjacencies, she called it. The future isn't government dependency, it's diversified revenue streams. She looked at $1.8 billion in classified NRO contracts and saw a liability. She looked at the firmware that guided reconnaissance satellites from low Earth orbit and saw maintenance code. She looked at my team, 4 cleared engineers with a combined 61 years of classified program experience, and called us the maintenance crew. On a Tuesday in late November, she purged the firmware baseline from the classified repository. All 3 active satellite programs, every generation of architecture, every verified build, every iteration, gone. Not archived. Not backed up to a secondary partition. Purged. Deleted to make room for her drone development environment. That evening, she sent a company-wide email. I read it on my phone in the hallway, standing next to Keith, the cipher lock still glowing red. Excited to announce the sunset of legacy systems and the dawn of Halcyon's commercial future. #innovation. A hashtag. In a defense contractor's internal email about deleting classified satellite firmware. I read it twice, put my phone in my pocket, felt the Pentel pencil in my shirt pocket. The same model, the same weight, the tool I'd used to write the first line of the architecture she'd just erased. I touched it once, then I put my hands in my pockets and walked toward the exit. Keith watched me go. He didn't say anything. The hallway was quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Outside, the air hit me like a wall. 38 degrees. Late November in Northern Virginia. Bare trees in the office park. The branches sharp against a gray sky. My breath came out in a thin white line. The parking lot was half empty. Most of the engineering staff had already gone home. Vanessa's white Tesla was in the reserved spot closest to the entrance, the one with the personalized plates. INOVN 8. It was plugged into the charging station Leland had installed for her last month. I walked to my 4Runner. 2014. Dark gray. 162,000 miles. Nolan's wrestling bag in the back seat. A Virginia Tech alumni window Kling Meg stuck on 7 years ago. No bumper stickers. OPSEC habit. You don't advertise anything about yourself when your whole life is classified. I sat behind the wheel. Engine off. The dashboard glow faded. Through the windshield, the Halcyon building was just another low-slung office park with no signage. The kind of building you drive past on Route 28 1,000 times and never wonder about. I'd spent 16 years inside that building, writing firmware in silence, missing my son's matches, eating Thanksgiving alone, carrying knowledge I couldn't share with a single person I loved. And a 26-year-old with a Stanford blazer and a hashtag had just deleted all of it because she needed room for drones. I sat in the driveway for a long time. The house lights were warm through the kitchen window. I could see Meg moving inside. She saw the 4Runner. She didn't come out. She knew. She always knew. Keith's email came through at 6:14 a.m. Wednesday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched, watching the sky go from black to gray through the window over the sink. Meg was still asleep. Nolan's door was closed. He'd been up late working on a carburetor rebuild in the garage, and I'd heard him come in around 11. The email was a forwarded chain. Keith had stripped the headers, but the thread was intact. 6 messages over 3 days, dated the previous week. Vanessa and 2 external consultants she'd brought in from some commercial tech advisory firm in San Francisco. I didn't recognize their names. They didn't have clearances. They'd never set foot in a skiff. But they were advising Halcyon's VP of Innovation on the restructuring of the company's entire engineering division. I read the chain once, slowly, the way I read technical specifications. Every word, every implication, every assumption embedded in the language. The key passage was in Vanessa's 3rd message. The satellite team is deadweight. Stewart's been coasting on code he wrote a decade ago. We need engineers who build the future, not janitors who babysit the past. Once we sunset the legacy programs, We can redirect the headcount to the drone pipeline. Systems janitor. That was her term for the man who designed guidance firmware for reconnaissance satellites operating at 22,000 miles. Janitor. I kept reading. The last message in the chain was the one that mattered. Vanessa, responding to a consultant who'd flagged the risk of losing senior technical staff during a restructuring. He's 50, and his entire career is classified work no one else sees. Where's he going to go? I set the phone down on the kitchen table, looked at my coffee, picked it up and drank half of it in one swallow. It was cold. The bun machine made it too hot, so I always poured it and let it sit. And by the time I got around to drinking it, it was room temperature. 16 years of the same pattern. Where's he going to go? She thought I was trapped. 50 years old, hyper-specialized, buried so deep in the classified world that the rest of the industry couldn't see me. In her head, I was a man with no options. Too old, too niche, too invisible to matter outside the walls of her father's building. She'd never held a clearance. She didn't understand that security clearances are held by individuals, administered by the government, and transferable between facilities. She didn't know that being one of 3 people in the country who can do something doesn't make you unemployable. It makes you the most employable person in the room. If you've ever had your life's work erased by someone who couldn't spell it, hit that like button and subscribe. By the time I finished reading the email chain, 2 things had already happened that Vanessa didn't know about. The first happened at 7:48 a.m. Wednesday morning. Douglas Fletcher, Director of Classified Programs at Halcyon, 54 years old, career program manager who'd spent his entire adult life in defense acquisition, picked up his desk phone on the second ring. The caller was the NRO contracting officer for Halcyon's satellite portfolio. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Fletcher told me later he spent the first 2 minutes listening and the last 2 trying to keep his hands steady. All deliveries suspended, effective immediately. Security review initiated across all 3 active programs. Halcyon's $1.8 billion contract portfolio had entered a 60-day cure period. If the company couldn't demonstrate restored firmware capability within 60 days, the contracts would be terminated for default and opened for competitive rebid. 60 days. For firmware that took 16 years to build. Fletcher hung up the phone. He pulled up the classified repository on his workstation. The firmware baseline directories were empty, not archived, not migrated, purged. He scrolled through the access logs and found the deletion timestamp. Tuesday, 4:47 p.m. User credentials, V. Kearns. He walked to Vanessa's office. She was at her desk, laptop open, working on the drone initiative pitch deck. The cardinal red blazer was draped over the back of her chair. Her Apple Watch buzzed against the glass desk surface while he stood in the doorway. Vanessa, the NRO just suspended all deliveries on our satellite programs. She looked up. Which programs? All 3. Every active program we have. They've initiated a security review and we're in a 60-day cure period. Okay, what does that mean for the drone timeline? Fletcher stared at her. He told me later that he stood in that doorway for a full 5 seconds, trying to find the words to explain to the vice president of innovation that she had just functionally destroyed the company's sole classified program. That the $1.8 billion portfolio she'd dismissed as legacy infrastructure was the only thing between Halcyon Aerospace and a death certificate. Vanessa, the firmware you deleted last night, that was the baseline for all 3 satellite programs. It's the only verified build. There's no backup. There's no documentation outside the classified network. The NRO needs us to restore it within 60 days, or they terminate the contracts. She blinked. So have Stewart's team restore it. Stewart's team can't restore it. Stewart is the only person who fully understands the architecture. The other engineers work on subsystems. They don't have the complete picture. Only Stewart does. Then tell Stewart to fix it. You called his work legacy junk. You purged his repository. You sent a company-wide email celebrating the deletion of the systems he spent 16 years building. Something shifted in her face. Not understanding. Not remorse. Calculation. I don't know exactly what Fletcher said to Leland Kearns. He said he was going to call him back. I don't know exactly what Fletcher said to Leland. I know how the conversation ended, because Fletcher told me a week later over coffee. Leland's voice went quiet. The particular silence of a man who built a company from a two-man office in 1989, who understood the classified world because he'd lived in it as an engineer before he became a chairman, and who had just been told that his daughter had erased its foundation. Fletcher said there was a pause so long he thought the line had dropped. Then, Leland said two words: find him. By then, I was already gone. The second thing that happened. Wednesday morning, the thing Vanessa didn't know about, happened at 9:22 a.m. when I called Gerald Ward. Gerald Ward, CEO of Orion Defense Systems, 59 years old, former Air Force colonel, 26 years in space systems acquisition before he crossed over to the private sector. I'd known Gerald for over a decade. Classified conferences, industry panels, the small circuit of people who worked at the intersection of satellites and national security. He'd been trying to recruit me for 6 years. Every time we crossed paths, the conversation always ended the same way. "Stuart, when you're ready, the door's open." And I'd say, "I appreciate that, Gerald." And I'd drive back to Chantilly and walk through the cipher lock and sit down at my workstation and keep building. 6 years of that. 6 years of loyalty to a company that let a 26-year-old with a hashtag delete what I'd given my life to build. I called him from my 4Runner, parked in the driveway. Engine off. The steering wheel cold under my hands. "Gerald, it's Stuart." 2-second pause. I heard. "The NRO suspension hit the grapevine about an hour ago." Then you know what happened. I know someone at Halcyon purged a firmware baseline from a classified repository, and 3 programs just went dark. I know the cure period is 60 days, and I know there's exactly one person who can rebuild it. That's why I'm calling. Gerald's voice changed. Not warmer, more precise. The voice of a man who had been playing a long game and just watched the last piece fall into place. "Stuart, I've had a desk waiting for you for 6 years. $19 million. Full compensation package. Full lab authority. You pick your team. You set your schedule. You answer to me and nobody else. Senior Vice President of Space Systems. Your clearance transfers in 48 hours through standard facility processing. Orion doesn't lose people like you. We collect them." $19 million. I'd been making $287,000 at Halcyon and hadn't asked for a raise in 4 years because asking felt like disloyalty. "I'll need 9 days," I said. "Take 12. 9. Gerald didn't argue. He'd spent 26 years in the Air Force. He knew what it sounded like when a man had already done the math. Thursday morning, I walked into Orion's facility in Sterling, Virginia. 17 miles from Halcyon's building in Chantilly. A different office park, a different cipher lock, a different badge with my name and photo, and a clearance level that opened every door in the building. The Pentel pencil was in my shirt pocket. Same weight, same click. The SCIF smelled the same. Recycled air, institutional coffee, fluorescent hum. A bun brewer bolted to the counter in the break room, identical to the one at Halcyon. I poured a cup and let it sit. Gerald gave me a classified workspace and 4 workstations. I selected a team of 4 engineers, all TS/SCI cleared, all vetted, all handpicked from Orion's existing space systems division. I briefed them for 2 hours. Then I started writing. The firmware architecture came out of my memory the way water comes out of a pipe you've just opened. 16 years of iterations, 3 generations of satellite programs, every adjustment and optimization and emergency patch. It was all there. Every line. I wrote on the classified workstation with the same focus I'd had in 2008, when I sat in a windowless room with graph paper and a mechanical pencil and designed the system from scratch. The only difference was the tool. Keyboard instead of pencil. But the architecture was the same. Mine. 9 days. My team and I built a next-generation firmware suite. Not a copy of what Vanessa deleted, but a better version. Faster verification cycles, improved guidance algorithms, cleaner integration with the NRO's current satellite bus configuration. Everything Halcyon's firmware did, plus everything I'd wanted to improve for 3 years, but never got authorization to touch because Vanessa's father had stopped investing in the classified programs. On the 9th day, I signed the technical validation document. Orion submitted a competitive bid to the NRO with a working firmware demonstration attached. While I was building, Halcyon was dying. Day 2 after the suspension, the NRO sent a formal notice demanding a remediation plan within 14 days. Halcyon's compliance team scrambled. They couldn't produce a plan because the technical lead was gone, and there was no documentation to work from. The documentation was sitting in a skiff in Sterling, writing code. Day 5, Keith Holloway resigned. Walked into HR, badge on the desk, 2 sentences. 2 other engineers from my former team followed him out before lunch. All 3 had accepted offers at Orion. Keith started the following Monday. Day 7, the NRO contracting officer called Douglas Fletcher directly and asked a single question. Can Halcyon restore the firmware capability without Stuart Ames? Fletcher paused for 3 seconds. Then he was honest. No. Day 9, Orion's bid landed on the NRO's desk. Technical demonstration included. Stuart Ames's signature on the validation page. The 60-day clock was still running at Halcyon. They had 51 days left. They had no firmware, no documentation, no technical lead, and no path to restoration. 3 of their best engineers were now working for the company that had just submitted a competing bid built on knowledge that walked out of Halcyon's parking lot in the head of a man, their VP of innovation, called a Janitor. Vanessa's LinkedIn post was still live. Day 1 of a new era. Bold leadership means making the hard calls. Hashtag innovation. Hashtag aerospace. Innovation. Hashtag NextGen. The standing desks she'd ordered for the drone team were delivered on a Wednesday. Nobody assembled them. The conference room she'd redecorated sat empty. The drone initiative pitch deck was still open on her laptop, the cursor blinking on slide 14. Revenue diversification, a 5-year roadmap. There was no 5-year roadmap. There was a 60-day clock, and it was running out. Leland Kearns hadn't spoken to his daughter in a week. Douglas Fletcher was fielding daily calls from the NRO, each one shorter and colder than the last. Halcyon's board had called an emergency session, and 17 miles away, in a SCEF in Sterling, I was pouring cold coffee from a bun machine and reviewing the firmware suite that was about to end a company's life. The Pentel pencil was in my shirt pocket. I hadn't needed it, but I kept it there anyway. Some tools aren't about function. They're about remembering what you built and who tried to erase it. The NRO awarded the contract to Orion Defense Systems on a Monday morning in late January. I was in the skiff when Gerald Ward walked in and set a single sheet of paper on my workstation. Unclassified cover memo. The classified details were in a separate packet already logged into the secure system. But the cover memo had the only line that mattered. Contract award, satellite guidance, firmware development, and sustainment. Orion Defense Systems. Sterling, Virginia. Largest single contract transfer in NRO procurement history. I read it once, set it down, picked up my coffee. It was cold. Gerald stood in the doorway for a moment. He didn't congratulate me. He didn't shake my hand. He just nodded, one short dip of the chin, the kind of gesture you learn in the military when words aren't the right tool. Then he walked back to his office. I sat at my workstation for another 3 minutes. The fluorescent lights hummed. The recycled air tasted the same as it had at Halcyon. The Pentel pencil was in my shirt pocket. I went back to work. The news hit the defense trade press by noon. By 1:15 p.m., Halcyon Aerospace's stock had dropped 18%. By Friday close, 44%. The financial analysts didn't need a classified briefing to understand what had happened. When your sole classified program walks out the door to a competitor, the market does the math faster than any engineer. Leland Kearns fired Vanessa on a Thursday. Douglas Fletcher told me about it weeks later, over coffee at a diner off Route 7. The kind of place with vinyl booths and ESPN on a TV nobody watches. Fletcher had been in the hallway when it happened. Leland's oak-paneled office, the one that still smelled like cigar smoke, even though he'd quit 4 years ago. The framed photo of the first satellite Halcyon ever worked on was hanging behind his desk. A grainy black and white image from 1991, back when the company was 6 people and a rented office and a dream that happened to involve orbit. Vanessa walked in wearing the cardinal red blazer. She was carrying her laptop, a pitch deck still loaded on the screen. Fletcher said she started talking about the drone initiative before she even sat down, something about revised timelines and new commercial partnerships. Leland let her finish. Then he said 5 words. "You deleted what I built." Vanessa started to respond. Something about legacy systems, about forward-looking strategy, about the commercial market being the future. Leland raised his hand. Not his voice. His hand. 35 years. I spent 35 years building this company. You erased the foundation in an afternoon because you needed room for drones. He took off his reading glasses and set them on the desk. Get out of my building. She didn't argue. Fletcher said she stood there for 6 seconds, laptop against her chest, and then walked out. The Stanford blazer was the last thing he saw as she turned the corner. Her Apple Watch buzzed against her wrist as she passed the security desk. The drone initiative was shut down the same day. The standing desks were never assembled. The redecorated conference room was locked. 3 more engineers resigned within 2 weeks. The commercial consulting contracts Vanessa had been cultivating evaporated. No partner firm wanted to attach its name to a defense contractor that had just lost its entire classified portfolio. Halcyon's defense industry reputation, the one Leland had spent 3.5 decades building handshake by handshake, was functionally destroyed in less than 60 days by a woman who thought firmware was furniture. By March, Halcyon's board was fielding acquisition inquiries. Not the kind of inquiries a healthy company receives. The kind a wounded company attracts. Vulture terms. Pennies on the dollar. The board held 3 emergency sessions in 2 weeks. Leland attended all of them. Fletcher said the old man looked smaller each time, his suspenders hanging a little looser on his shoulders, the reading glasses never quite clean. The acquisition offer they accepted came from Orion Defense Systems. Purchase price, 22 cents on the dollar. Gerald Ward's team had been preparing the paperwork for weeks. Patient, strategic, the long game completed. The signing took place in a conference room at Orion's Sterling headquarters on a Tuesday in April. Glass walls, new carpet, the late afternoon sun cutting through the blinds in clean horizontal lines. The NRO contract was framed on Gerald Ward's wall. Not centered, not displayed with ceremony, just mounted beside a photo of Gerald's old squadron and a framed set of Air Force Colonel's Eagles. The kind of wall that shows you what a man has done, not what he wants you to think about him. I was seated at the table. Gerald to my left. Halcyon's remaining board members across from me. 5 men in suits who looked like they hadn't slept through the night in months. Leland Kearns sat at the far end, hands folded, watching. My title was printed on the signature line of the purchase authorization, Stuart Ames, Senior Vice President of Space Systems, Orion Defense Systems. Gerald made the introductions, brief, professional. When he got to me, he kept it simple. Stuart Ames, SVP of Space Systems, the man who built the firmware suite that won the NRO contract, and the architect of the original systems your company was built on. One of Halcyon's board members, a man named Prescott, mid-60s, gray at the temples, financial background, looked across the table at me and said, "Stuart, I want you to know this wasn't... We didn't anticipate..." I held up my hand. Not the way Leland had with Vanessa. Quieter. Just enough. "I didn't leave Halcyon," I said. "Halcyon left itself. I just built what came next." The room was silent for 4 seconds. I signed the purchase authorization with a company-issued pen. Black ink, Orion letterhead, not my Pentel pencil. That one's for building things, not buying them. Leland Kearns was the last person to leave the conference room. He stood slowly, buttoned his jacket, the top button only, an old habit, and walked to where I was organizing the signed documents. He was shorter than I remembered. Or maybe I just hadn't looked at him closely in years. His hands were spotted with age. The suspenders were the same ones he'd worn for as long as I'd known him. Dark blue, simple, nothing fancy. He extended his hand. I took it. "You were always the one running the programs," he said. "I just signed the overhead." "You built something worth saving, Leland. That's more than most people get." It wasn't forgiveness. It was the truth. He built a company that mattered. He let the wrong person dismantle it. Both of those things were real, and neither one canceled the other. He nodded once, released my hand, walked out of the conference room. I didn't watch him go. The sun was hitting the glass walls at a low angle, turning everything amber. Vanessa Kearns was 26 years old, and her career in aerospace was over. Her LinkedIn post, "Bold leadership means making the hard calls," was cached and screenshotted across 3 defense industry forums before she thought to take it down. Her Stanford network, the one she'd leveraged for consulting connections and advisory board introductions, went quiet. Not loud, quiet. Calls unreturned, emails unanswered. The classified community is small, smaller than Stanford's alumni network, and in that community, everyone knew what she'd done. Not because anyone violated classification rules, because the contract transfer was public, the stock crash was public, and the acquisition was public. The defense press connected the dots without needing a briefing. No defense firm would touch her. Not because of the MBA, because of the judgment. You can teach someone systems engineering. You can't teach someone not to delete what they don't understand. I drove home that evening. The 4Runner, same as always. 162,000 miles. Nolan's wrestling bag still in the back seat. He'd had a tournament the previous Saturday. I'd been there for it. All 7 matches. Sat in the bleachers with Meg on one side and a coffee in my hand, watching my son work. He'd gone 5-2. Took third at 170. The drive from Sterling to home was 22 minutes. Dogwood trees were budding along the residential streets. That tentative early spring green, the first real color after months of gray branches and bare sky. I cracked the window. The air smelled like something thawing. Soil, mulch, the faint sweetness of whatever was blooming in the neighbor's yard. The kind of air that reminds you seasons still exist when you've spent your life in rooms without windows. I pulled into the driveway. Engine off. I sat for a moment. Not the defeated stillness of that November night when Vanessa had erased my work and I'd stared at the kitchen window and waited for the math to stop running. This was different. Settled. The math was done. Inside, the kitchen was warm. Nolan was at the table, textbook open, notebook beside it, pencil moving. Physics homework. Meg was in the next room, reading. I could see the lamp on, the edge of her shoulder, the quiet posture of a woman who'd spent 22 years not asking questions about classified programs and never once making me feel guilty about the silence. I hung my keys on the hook by the door, set my badge on the counter, Orion's badge now, my photo and name, and a clearance level printed in small type. The Pentel pencil was still in my shirt pocket. I sat down next to Nolan. He didn't look up right away. He was working through a problem, pencil paused mid-line, thinking. I could see the problem set. Orbital mechanics, Kepler's laws, the math that describes how objects move in elliptical paths around a central body, the math that makes satellites work. He finished the line, looked over at me. You want to check my work? I picked up a pencil, a regular one, wooden, dull point, from the cup on the kitchen table. Not the Pentel. And I started reading. For the first time in 16 years, the most important architecture I was reviewing wasn't classified. The thing about classified knowledge is this. You can delete the file, but you can't delete the mind that wrote it. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and ring that notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.